The village stood at the edge of the great forest, a place where the whispers of ancestors were carried by the wind. The trees, ancient and wise, stretched their arms toward the heavens, their roots deep in the earth, intertwined with the souls of those who had lived and died long before the present. The forest was sacred, a realm where gods and spirits walked, where the villagers came for guidance, for strength, and for the wisdom passed down through the ages. The air was thick with the scent of earth and rain, and the rhythmic sounds of life in the village blended with the calls of birds and the rustling of the leaves. Women pounded grain in mortar and pestle, their steady beats echoing like drums of old. Men worked the fields, their strong hands digging into the soil, coaxing the crops to grow, while children played by the river, their laughter ringing like a song of joy. Every person knew their place in the grand circle of life, where the old and the young, the living and the ancestors, all shared in the same rhythm. But the harmony of the village was not without its tension. The modern world, with its strange ways and unfamiliar voices, was creeping closer. Like a storm on the horizon, the elders, wise and knowing, spoke of the time when the forest was the realm of the gods, when the world was simple and sacred. But now there were whispers of change, of a future that seemed to threaten the balance they had so carefully protected. Among them was Nia, the daughter of the village chief, a young woman whose beauty was matched only by her intelligence. Nia had always been different. She was not like the other women of the village, who dreamed of marriage and children, of following the path laid before them by their ancestors. Nia dreamed of something more. She longed to step beyond the boundaries of the village, to taste the freedom that seemed to call to her from beyond the trees. She had heard of the outside world, of cities and people who lived without the constraints of tradition. The thought stirred something deep within her, something wild and untamed. Yet Nia's heart was torn. She loved her village, its people, and its ways. The traditions were her blood, her bones, but they were also her chains. The expectations of her family, of her community, were clear. She was to marry, to bear children, to continue the cycle that had been followed for generations. Nia could not ignore the call of her own dreams, the desire to chart her own course, to choose her own destiny. But each time she allowed herself to think of freedom, a wave of guilt washed over her, for to defy her family and her people would mean to break the sacred bond between them. Nia's cousin, Kofi, was a man of ambition. He had always believed that he was destined for greatness, that he alone should lead the village. He saw himself as the natural successor to the village chief, the one who would carry the weight of tradition into the future. But Kofi's pride had always been overshadowed by Nia's presence. The elders respected her, saw her intelligence and wisdom, and whispered of a future where she, not he, would guide the people. This gnawed at Kofi, fueling a bitterness that he could not shake. He watched Nia with a mixture of admiration and resentment, secretly wishing for a time when he would be the one to shape the village's future. Kofi believed that power lay in control, in dominance. He knew that Nia's spirit, her dreams of freedom, posed a threat to his own ambitions. If she were to rise in power, if the elders were to crown her as the future leader, then all of Kofi's plans would be ruined. But he was patient. He bided his time, waiting for the right moment to strike, to manipulate the course of events to his favor. He knew that if he could control Nia, bend her will to his own, then he would control the future of the village, and perhaps even the future of his family. Meanwhile, Nia's best friend, Essie, stood firmly rooted in the old ways. Essie was a woman of deep faith, a woman who believed that a woman's place was to serve the village and honor the ancestors. She spent her days performing rituals, tending to the sacred fires, and ensuring that the ancient customs were upheld. Aci loved Nia, but she could not understand her desire to break free from the traditions that had sustained their people for so long. For Aci, the very thought of abandoning their ways was anathema, a betrayal of everything their ancestors had built. She feared that Nia's dreams of change would bring chaos, that by abandoning the old ways, they would lose the connection to their ancestors that had kept the village strong for centuries. The elders, wise but set in their ways, watched Nia closely. They had seen her potential for leadership, and many believed that she could lead the village into a new age, one where both the ancient ways and the new world could coexist. But others were wary. To them, Nia represented a threat, a disruption of the delicate balance that had. It was during this time that Nia received a letter. It came as a surprise, carried by a messenger from beyond the village. The letter was written in a familiar hand, but the words were cryptic, shrouded in mystery. The message was urgent, filled with a sense of foreboding, and spoke of a great betrayal that had shaken the village long before Nia was born. The letter revealed a truth that had been kept hidden from her for generations. Her great-grandmother, a revered spiritual leader, had been involved in a betrayal that had torn the spiritual heart of the village. This revelation rocked Nia to her core, the very foundation of her identity. The legacy she had carried with such pride now seemed to crumble before her. The letter spoke of lies, of secrets that had been buried deep in the earth, and of a truth that had been hidden from the people. Nia's world, once so clear and certain, now seemed clouded with doubt. She realized that her ancestors, the ones she had revered and sought to honor, had their own flaws, their own mistakes, and this knowledge shattered the image she had carried of them, of a people who were perfect, whose wisdom had guided the village through generations of peace. Nia stood at a crossroads, torn between the world of her ancestors, with all its customs and expectations, and the world that beckoned beyond the forest, where she could be free to make her own choices. She realized that the path ahead was not so simple as following the village's expectations or the promises of the outside world. She would have to make a choice that would change the course of her life and her family's future. The weight of her ancestors' legacy pressed upon her, but the call of freedom, of self-expression, could no longer be denied. The elders watched Nia closely, their eyes heavy with the knowledge of her inner turmoil. They knew that the future of the village rested in her hands, but they were unsure whether she would choose to uphold the old ways or carve out a new path for herself. Kofi, sensing the growing distance between Nia and the village's expectations, began to grow more determined in his plans. His jealousy had festered into something darker, and he saw an opportunity to manipulate the situation to his advantage. The stage was set. Nia's journey had only just begun, and the choices she made in the coming days would shape not only her future, but the future of the entire village. As the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the village with the soft, orange glow of dusk, Nia sat alone in the small round hut that had once been a place of comfort and love. The air around her was thick with the scent of earth and firewood, and the distant hum of the village's evening activities seemed to fade into the background as her thoughts clouded her mind. The day of her arranged marriage was fast approaching, and her heart grew heavier with each passing hour. She could feel the weight of the expectations pressing down on her, expectations that she should marry the man chosen for her, settle into the role of wife, and live her life according to the traditions of the village. Yet deep inside, Nia's spirit rebelled. Her heart longed for something more, something that lay beyond the village, beyond the traditions that held her captive. Her thoughts drifted to the secret letters she had received from a man far outside her world. He spoke of cities where freedom was not a dream, but a reality, where one could choose their own path, unshackled by the weight of familial duty and the chains of tradition. Every word in those letters stirred something deep within Nia: hope, fear, and a longing she had never known. But the letters also filled her with guilt. How could she, the daughter of the village chief, betray her ancestors and her people in such a way? Her mind was a battlefield, torn between two worlds. The world she knew, with its values, its sacred rituals, and the promise of stability, and the world of freedom, a world she only dreamed of, but knew she could never fully embrace. Nia pressed her palms to her eyes, willing away the tears that threatened to fall. It wasn't just about her anymore. Her choice would affect the future of the village, her family, and the very traditions that had sustained them for generations. Could she risk everything for the chance of something better? The village had been alive with whispers since the stranger arrived. He was not from the village, nor from any of the nearby towns that bordered their lands. His clothes were strange, and his manner even stranger. The way he spoke, with his eyes bright and his words laced with promises of a life outside the confines of their world, had caught the attention of many, but none more than Nia. His presence was like a spark in dry grass, igniting something deep inside her, something she didn't know she had been missing. They met in secret, as all forbidden things must, beneath the shade of the ancient baobab tree. Nia found herself listening to the stranger with rapt attention. His words, though simple, seemed to dance in the air between them, painting pictures of a world filled with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. "You are more than just the daughter of a chief, Nia," he said one evening, his voice barely above a whisper, as though the trees themselves were listening. "You are a woman with a mind, a heart, and a destiny far greater than the one they wish to give you. There is a world out there, vast, free, and waiting for someone like you. You need not live in the shadow of what others have chosen for you." Nia's heart beat faster at his words. Was this truly possible? Could she leave it all behind? But fear gnawed at her, and she found herself questioning if she could really walk away from everything she had ever known. "But what of my people?" Nia asked, her voice trembling. "What of the elders, the traditions? My father?" The stranger smiled softly, his eyes full of understanding. "What of them, Nia? They speak of traditions. But do they speak of your happiness? Can you give away your soul to fulfill a role that was never meant for you?" Nia was silent for a moment, her heart torn between the world she had always known and the promise of a new beginning. In that moment, she realized that something inside her had changed. A seed of doubt had been planted. She could never again see the world the same way. Meanwhile, Kofi, ever watchful and ever scheming, sensed that something was amiss. He had always been aware of Nia's intelligence and her beauty, but now he saw something more dangerous: her growing independence. Kofi, driven by his own ambition and jealousy, began to see her as a threat. She had always been the one to receive the attention of the elders, the praise for her wisdom, and the respect of the people. But now there was the stranger, and with the stranger came the possibility that Nia might choose a life outside of the village, outside of Kofi's grasp. Kofi's mind worked like a spider's web, weaving lies and manipulations. He whispered to the elders, suggesting that Nia's desire to leave was a betrayal. "The girl is no longer one of us," he would say, his voice dripping with disdain. "She has been seduced by the outside world, corrupted by empty promises. Can we let her destroy everything we have worked for?" The elders, wise yet bound to their own rigid beliefs, took these words to heart. The idea of losing Nia, a potential leader who could influence the future of the village, was too much to bear. They began to look at her with suspicion, as though her very presence threatened the delicate balance they had upheld for generations. As Nia sat by the fire that evening, she could feel the coldness between her and her father. His gaze was distant, clouded by something she couldn't understand. Once, he had been her protector, her guide, the man whose wisdom had shaped her childhood. Now he was a stranger, cold, distant, and lost in the eyes of the elders. "Nia," her father said quietly, his voice lacking the warmth it once held. "I know what you are planning." Nia looked up, startled. "Father, what do you mean?" He sighed deeply, his eyes heavy with regret. "The elders have spoken. They are not pleased with your behavior. They believe your actions are a threat to our village, to our way of life." His eyes flickered with fear. "You must marry the man chosen for you. It is the only way to bring peace." Nia's heart shattered at his words. She had always believed her father would support her, but now he seemed like a puppet, his strings pulled by the very traditions he had once taught her to honor. "You do not understand, father," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This is not just about a marriage. It is about my life, my future." But her father was silent, his face unreadable. In the days that followed, Nia's mother too began to withdraw into herself. Once, she had been Nia's greatest source of comfort, the woman who held her close and whispered words of wisdom in her ear. But now, her mother avoided her gaze, speaking in hushed tones, her hands shaking when they touched Nia's. One night, as Nia sat by the fire, she saw her mother enter the hut with a letter in her hand. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Mother, what is it?" Nia asked, her voice soft but insistent. Her mother looked at the letter, then at Nia, her eyes filled with fear. "You are not the only one who is being watched, Nia. Kofi has poisoned their minds. They are all waiting for you to fail, for you to choose the outsider over us." The truth of her mother's words sank deep into Nia's heart. She wasn't alone in her struggle, but she was being betrayed by the very people who should have been her allies. Her own family was being manipulated, caught in the web of Kofi's lies. It was on one of these nights, when the weight of everything seemed unbearable, that Nia received the letter. It came without warning, its arrival shrouded in mystery. There was no return address, no sign of who had sent it. But as she opened it, she recognized the handwriting, familiar yet foreign, as though it had come from the past, from someone she had never known. The letter spoke of things she had never been told, secrets buried deep within her family's history. It revealed a great betrayal, one that had divided the village long ago, a betrayal that involved her great-grandmother, once the spiritual leader of the village. It was a truth that had been hidden from her, a truth that would shake her understanding of her family and her place in the world. The words of the letter were like poison, filling her with doubt. Her great-grandmother, the spiritual leader, had been stripped of her title and cast out due to a betrayal that had split the village in two. Nia's family had been at the center of this rift, and the pain of that division had never healed. The letter spoke of a curse placed upon her family, a curse that had followed them for generations, waiting for the right moment to claim its toll. And now Nia realized it was her time. Her birth had been foretold, a sign that the village's destiny would either be redeemed or destroyed, depending on the choices she made. The weight of the prophecy pressed down on her like a stone, heavy and unyielding. Her decision, whether to stay or leave, would determine not only her fate, but the fate of everyone she loved. Nia stood at the crossroads now, her heart torn between two worlds. The love she had for her people, for her father and mother, was battling the desire to break free. The letter had shown her the truth of her ancestry, a truth that could not be ignored. But what could she do with this knowledge? She was a woman Naya, stood beneath the great baobab tree, her heart heavy with the burden of truth. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it the echoes of her ancestors. As if urging her to step forward, she looked at her father, the man who had once been her rock, her protector, now a shadow of the figure she once admired. The time had come to ask the questions that had been buried deep within her, questions that had long gnawed at her soul. Father, Nia's voice trembled, but her eyes were fierce with determination. I have come to ask you something that I can no longer ignore. She held up the letter, the paper crinkling in her hands like the dried leaves beneath her feet. Her father's eyes, once bright with wisdom, now seemed clouded with guilt and fear. He avoided her gaze, staring at the ground as though the earth itself might swallow him whole. Nia, he began, his voice a mere whisper, as if the wind itself might carry his words away. There are things in this world that should never be spoken, secrets that, if revealed, could tear us apart. I cannot live in the dark anymore. Nia pressed, her voice stronger now, more insistent. Tell me, father, what is this pact with Kofi's family? What is it that you have hidden from me? The letter speaks of a bargain made long ago, one that has shaped all our lives. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, her father spoke, his words low and heavy. I made a promise, Naya. A promise to Kofi's family, long before you were born. We agreed to bury the truth about your great-grandmother's leadership, to silence her voice, for the sake of power, for the sake of control over the village. We kept her legacy hidden, not just from you, but from everyone. Nia felt as though the ground had been ripped from beneath her. But why? Her voice cracked with the weight of the question. Why would you do such a thing? Her father closed his eyes, as though the very act of remembering caused him pain. Because, my daughter, the power of the women in our family, your great-grandmother's power, was too great, too dangerous. The men feared it, feared what she could have become. And so, I made a choice I now regret deeply. Nia's heart ached as the truth unraveled before her, each word a dagger in her chest. The man who had taught her everything about honor and duty had betrayed the very essence of their people, hiding their sacred heritage in the shadows for the sake of power. The fire crackled in the center of the village, its flames dancing like spirits in the night. Nia, her mind still reeling from the conversation with her father, walked slowly towards the elders' circle. The moon hung high above, casting its silvery light over the gathered elders, who were waiting for her. They had summoned her, their voices heavy with concern. Nia stood tall before them, her heart no longer burdened with fear, but with a fierce sense of clarity. Elders, she began, her voice steady, filled with the weight of 1,000 generations. I stand before you, not as a daughter of tradition, but as a daughter of truth. For too long, our village has been shackled by lies and fear. For too long, the voices of our women have been silenced. The elders shifted uncomfortably, some of them casting wary glances at each other. But Nia could feel it, the shift in the air, the subtle tremor beneath her feet. She was no longer the girl they had once controlled, the girl they had expected to obey. She was now a force unto herself. I ask you now, Nia continued, to confront the ancient injustices that have haunted our people. The truth of my great-grandmother, the rightful spiritual leader of this village, has been hidden for far too long. Her wisdom, her power, was stolen from us, all in the name of political gain. The wind picked up, swirling around Nia, as if the ancestors themselves were listening. Their voices carried on the breeze. You, the elders, who have stood in silence for generations, now have a choice. Will you continue to bow to the lies that have been woven? Or will you stand with me and embrace the truth? Her words hung in the air, heavy with the promise of change. The elders murmured among themselves, unsure of what to say, but Nia could feel it, the stirring of something ancient within the village, something that had long been dormant, but was now awakening. From the shadows, Kofi emerged, his face twisted with fury, his eyes burned with anger, his mouth set in a grim line. He had been listening, waiting for this moment to strike. You speak of truth, Nia, Kofi sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. But the truth you speak is nothing but a betrayal. You would tear this village apart, destroy the very foundations that have kept us strong, all for the sake of your selfish desires. The crowd tensed, murmuring in fear. Kofi had always been a powerful figure in the village, his influence over the elders unquestioned. But as he spoke, Nia could feel the ground beneath her feet begin to tremble, as if the earth itself was rejecting his words. You accuse me of betrayal, Nia said, her voice rising with each word. But it is you, Kofi, who have betrayed us all. You have sought to erase the legacy of our ancestors, to silence the voices of the women who once led this village with wisdom and strength. Your ambition knows no bounds, and it is you who are the true traitor. Kofi's eyes flashed with fury. You think you can challenge me? He spat. You think you can change the way things have always been. You are nothing but a child playing with fire. I will not let you destroy everything that I have built. But as he spoke, a strange sensation filled the air. The elders, once so loyal to Kofi, now seemed uneasy, shifting in their seats as the ground beneath them seemed to grow colder. Nia felt it too. A deep ancient power awakening in the depths of the village. The spirits of the ancestors were stirring, their voices rising in the wind. Nia stepped forward, her heart steady, her voice calm. It is you, Kofi, who will be destroyed. The ancestors will not allow your betrayal to stand. You cannot rewrite our history, no matter how hard you try. Kofi's fury reached its peak as he stormed out of the council, vowing to bring Nia to her knees. But as he moved towards the edge of the village, something strange happened. The earth trembled beneath his feet, and a great wind began to howl. Through the trees, its force pushing him back, he stumbled, his heart racing as a deep, ominous presence filled the air. The ancient spirits of the village had awoken, and they were not pleased. In the distance, the moon seemed to grow darker, casting a shadow over the land. Kofi felt his strength begin to wane, as if something greater than him was at work. The ground beneath him shifted, and he fell to his knees, his body trembling with fear. As he looked up, the sky seemed to crack open, and a blinding light engulfed him. It was as though the very spirit of the village's ancestral leader had come to exact justice for the years of betrayal. Kofi's voice, once so full of confidence, was now filled with terror. No, I am in control. I have the power. But his cries were swallowed by the wind, and in that moment, he was struck down, his body crumpling to the ground as the earth claimed him. The village was silent. The elders, once so complicit in Kofi's schemes, now understood the weight of their silence. They had allowed the lies to grow, but now the truth had come crashing down upon them. Nia stood at the center of the council grounds, her heart filled with both sorrow and triumph. The spirits of her ancestors stood with her, their voices now, clear and strong in the winds that swirled around her. I have done what was necessary, Nia said, her voice filled with the power of her lineage. Now we must rebuild. We must honor the legacy of our ancestors. And we must ensure that no voice is ever silenced again. The elders, their faces filled with remorse, knelt before her. You are the true leader of this village, Nia, they said, their voices trembling. With respect, we will follow you, and together we will restore the balance that has been lost. And so, with the fall of Kofi and the awakening of the village's ancient spirits, a new era began. Nia, the daughter of the earth and the spirit, had embraced her true calling. The prophecy had been fulfilled, and the village was poised for a new dawn, one where the wisdom of women would once again guide them toward a brighter future. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the village. It was a time for reflection, for looking back at the path that had been traveled, and for considering the steps ahead. In the center of the village, the elders had gathered, their faces etched with the weight of years and decisions. Today, however, it was the weight of truth that pressed down upon them. The air was thick with anticipation. As Nia stepped into the clearing, her feet making soft impressions on the earth, as if the soil itself welcomed her. She stood tall, her heart heavy but resolute, and looked into the faces of the men and women who had once held the power to shape her destiny. They were no longer the towering figures of authority she once saw them as. Today, they were humbled, their eyes filled with something they had never before shown her. Regret. Elders, Nia began, her voice steady but carrying the depth of the land itself. It is time we honor what has been forgotten, what has been hidden for too long. You who have led this village for so many years, will you now honor the truth of our ancestors? The eldest among them, Elder Juma, his hair now silver like the moon, bowed his head. Nia, we have failed you, he said, his voice hoarse, with years of silence. And in failing you, we have failed our ancestors. The others nodded in agreement, their faces somber as they stood, one by one, in front of Nia. They were not the men and women who once scorned her and her lineage. They were now figures of humility, pleading for the chance to make amends. With a heavy heart, Elder Juma continued, We were wrong to silence the power of the women who came before you, Nia. Your great-grandmother was a force of nature, a beacon of wisdom and strength. It is with shame that we admit we were complicit in her erasure, but no more. We vow to honor her legacy and yours. From this day forward, the village watched in silence as the elders knelt before Nia, their heads bowed in reverence. This was a rare moment, a turning point that could not be undone. And in this sacred moment of reconciliation, the village began to feel the stirrings of change, like the first breath of wind after a long drought. Nia stood in the center of the gathering, feeling the weight of the past and the future upon her. Her heart, though heavy with the betrayal she had suffered, had learned to understand the wounds of others. The scars left by Kofi's ambition were deep, but she could not carry them forever. She had learned that to hold on to bitterness was to continue the cycle of suffering. Forgiveness, she said, her voice clear and full of power, is not just for the one who wronged you. It is for you, so that your heart may be free. The villagers watched as Nia spoke to them, not only as a leader, but as a healer. They remembered the bitterness in her eyes when Kofi had tried to steal her legacy. But now they saw that same spirit turn towards compassion. I forgive Kofi, she continued, her gaze steady. He was blinded by fear, a fear that stemmed from his own weakness. I do not forgive him to erase the past, but to make space for the future. The crowd gasped. Many had expected anger, more resentment, but what they heard instead was the voice of someone who had risen beyond the weight of revenge. It was a voice that called them all to rise with her. The old men and women who had once seen Kofi as the village's savior now looked at him with pity. He had been a man of ambition, of pride, but he was also a man bound by his own fears. In Nia's forgiveness, they saw the true strength of leadership. With the elders' acknowledgement of the past and the forgiveness of the present, Nia now turned her gaze to the future. Her vision was one of harmony, a place where the ancient wisdom of the village could meet the opportunities of the world beyond the hills. "We cannot change what has happened," she said, her voice rising with the promise of tomorrow. "But we can shape what is to come. We must honor the traditions of our ancestors. Yes, but we must also embrace the world that is calling us. We cannot remain in the shadows of the past, clinging to fear and superstition. We must reach out to what is beyond, while never forgetting and who we are." Nia's words were not just a call to action. They were a vision of unity. She spoke of the need for balance, of young and old, of tradition and progress, to walk together hand in hand. And in her heart, she knew the village would listen, for the seeds of wisdom were already planted in their hearts. "The man from the outside world, he is not a threat to us," Nia continued. "He is a bridge, a way for us to learn and grow. The wisdom of the past and the future must meet, or we will be left behind." As Nia's vision took root, the village began to change. Slowly but surely, the elders worked alongside the youth, teaching the younger generation the ancient ways, while also learning the ways of the outside world. There was no longer a great divide between the old and the new. The village began to thrive, not because they had forsaken their roots, but because they had nurtured them while welcoming the future. The spiritual practices, once silenced by the patriarchy, were revived. Women once again sat at the council, their voices strong and clear. Nia had not just reclaimed her heritage. She had restored the balance that had been lost for so long. She had not only brought her people back to the path of wisdom, but she had opened the door to the world beyond, the hills, where opportunity and growth awaited, and the people, once divided and fractured, now stood as one. The village was reborn, not in the image of the past, but in the strength of its people, united, forward-looking, and proud. In the end, Nia's story became a lesson for all. It was a story of redemption, not just for Kofi, but for the village itself. Kofi, now humbled by the truth, would not find peace easily. His past would follow him, and the scars of his ambition would remain. But in the forgiveness of Nia, he found a path to healing, a chance to rebuild his life. The village, too, had learned that redemption was not a one-time act. It was a way of life. They learned that progress could not come without confronting the past, and they knew that peace was not an end, but a continuous journey of growth, understanding, and transformation. As the story ended, the villagers gathered around the fire, the warmth of the flames reflecting the warmth in their hearts. They had learned, through the trials and tribulations of Nia's journey, that true strength was not in the power to control, but in the power to forgive and embrace change. And as they sang songs of old, they sang of a new dawn, one where the past, present, and future were united in harmony, guided by the wisdom of their ancestors and the hope of a brighter tomorrow.